Hello, in this demonstration I will show you a method of adding natural materials to plaster. In this bowl here I have some straw, some wood shavings, and I have a textile which is sacking. Now why would you want to add these sort of materials to plaster? Well, it creates an interesting surface. It also acts as a reinforcement to strengthen the plaster. It's a natural material, so these are natural materials, so it's quite safe, and it's probably safer than using fiberglass or chop strand, which is fiberglass. Now, to create the sample, I'm now going to show you how I did it, and I'm mixing the plaster. So I'll put that to one side. So I have this plastic tray which I prepared earlier. There is another demonstration video about mixing plaster, so if you wanted to refer to that as well, that helps. Right, I have a bowl of cold water, and now I'm going to add some plaster to it. Now this plaster is called Prestia Classic. It's quite reasonably priced, and you would have to purchase this from a recognised supplier of industrial plasters. Now I'm not going to measure this out or complicated mathematics. This is by far the easiest and best method of mixing plaster. So I have a small scoop, and I'm just going to gently drop or sprinkle the plaster over the surface of the water. And this is cold water, not warm. It's got to be cold. With any dusty materials like this, it is advisable to use a dust mask, a P2 dust mask. And the plaster, if you splash it into your eye, some of the plasters have lime in them, so I would also suggest wearing eye protection. Now I'm not tempted to start mixing this yet. I'm going to keep gently dropping, sieving, sprinkling the plaster over the surface of the water, and as you can see, the plaster is sinking to the bottom of the bowl. Now I'm not chucking large lumps, big mountains of plaster in. I'm just, as best I can, spread it over the whole surface of the bowl. Now I keep doing this until all the water has been totally consumed. There's quite a bit of water left. So I'm not tempted to start mixing. I'm going to carry on sprinkling the plaster over the surface of the water. Let's move to another. Okay, and it's now starting to form a kind of crust or surface, and so that now has consumed all the water, and that way you absolutely know it's the right mix of plaster to water. I'll put that out of the way. Now, as you can see, I wear nitrile gloves. If you want to do it with your hands, that's fine, but my suggestion is, if you do that, use a barrier cream or something to act as a barrier, because the plaster will just dry your skin out. So my recommendation is to wear nitrile gloves when you're mixing plaster. I like to use a spatula but you could use your fingers. Now I'm not going to whip this up, you don't need to, so it's just gently folding it in if we want to use a catering term. And as you can see, there's very little in the way of lumps, and it's a nice mix, and it's sticking to the spatula, which shows it's a good sign that it's the right mix. Right, I think we're just about ready now to start the process of putting the materials into the plastic tray. Okay, so I'll just move that to one side and put that in the middle of the shot. Now this is the sacking. I've slightly dampened it, and I've done this with all the materials, and that means to say that it will absorb the plaster far better. So with the case of this particular one, I want the surface to show the textile, so I'm going to put that in the mould first, and then I'm going to use, this is called cotton scrim, which the camera just about sees. So I'm going to put cotton scrim over that now, which sort of adds a little base to it and builds up some kind of integrity. So I'm just going to layer that in, and it will take quite a few of these, a number of these, to really get a good covering. I'm not rushing, you just take your time doing it. I think this is quite enjoyable. I like to try and keep it neat. It's stuck up. Right, I think we've got the idea of it now. Just do one more. So I don't want to push that in too much, because it's just enough to soak into the sacking. Okay, let's go to the next one. So in this one, it's wood shavings. Now you could use a pair of scissors and chop this up a bit finer if you wanted to. I quite like it because it gives you kind of these kind of open cellular cells of wood and plaster. So I'm literally just going to drop it in. Now how much you mix this into it is, I think you just got to experiment if you're going to try this process. So I'm just going to, that may be just enough. Otherwise, if it's too much, it will just all be plaster and you won't see any of the wood shavings or the cavities or the shapes in it. Let's move it back into the pictures because it's gone. That's it. That's really good. And then the last one, which is the straw. So I'm just going to just drop this in, and I have soaked it a little bit. And here again, I'm just gently turning it into it. So it gets enough covering, but it's also it still retains this kind of open structure, where all the strands cross over in each other, which adds to the textures and the interest. Okay, I think we get the idea of that. So we're coming sort of towards the end of this demonstration now. So this will take about 8 hours to set. So within 1 hour it's dry, but I mean it takes to harden off about 8 hours. So let's bring it back to show you what it looks like. So you've got an interesting textile shape. You've got it's in some places it's smooth, and then you've got these kind of cavities and structures with smooth surfaces. So in itself, it's quite an interesting a relief sculpture. But you could do the opposite. So in other words, you could, instead of having it into a mould, you could have just aluminium mesh, and then just put it directly straight onto the mesh, and it's very, very strong. I'd have quite a deal of difficulty in breaking that in half. So it's got a lot of integrity. It's quite lightweight. It's not heavy because of the natural materials. And just to get towards the end of the demonstration, you could do it into a 3D shape. So I had a laminated paper bowl, and so I just laminated it over the top. Now this is really lightweight, and it's got a nice interesting texture. You could have just smoothed some of the areas off if you wanted to, or leave it really heavily textured, depending on the kind of sculpture you want. It's a monocoque construction, so if this was a complete laminated paper structure, you would then have a hollow cavity inside, and it would look really solid, but it's actually lightweight. So I just wanted to sort of conclude with this, just to point out that there are many different sorts of plasters available, and applications and ways of mixing. So it's best to go to a dedicated supplier of plaster and this sort of materials, and they would then provide further details of different processes. Well, that's the end of the demonstration. I really do hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for watching.